Welcome to the Guardians of Hope podcast, where we bring together parents, nonprofits, legal, and medical experts dedicated to positively impacting children's lives. I'm your host, Cynthia Ramsaran. The thoughts and opinions of my guests are not necessarily my own, so thank you all for joining and sharing. All right, welcome, everyone. One of the most challenging aspects of parenting and caring for my child recently has been figuring out how to talk to him about the disturbing events he's inevitably exposed to through the news, social media, and conversations around him. Whether it's ongoing conflicts abroad, tragic events or accidents closer to home, or other headlines, children are processing these events in ways we may not even realize. They're forming questions, fears, and understanding that can deeply impact their sense of safety. Today, I'm joined by Corey Reed Banas, clinical therapist and founder of Rocky Mountain Counseling Collective. Corey brings professional expertise in family therapy and a deep understanding of how children process trauma and difficult information. Corey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm grateful to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. So, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I've been working with kids, children, and teenagers and families for over 20 years. And the last 12 years, I've been running Rocky Mountain Counseling Collective, which is a group mental health practice in Denver, Colorado. And we serve primarily the Denver metro area. And we have clients from all around the state, but primarily kind of the Denver metro area. I have experience kind of starting out as an athletic coach to supporting mentors, to wilderness therapy, outdoor leadership, and then for the last 12 years being a therapist at Rocky Mountain Counseling Collective. So yeah, thanks for having me today.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us, Corey. Now, I want to start with the basics about children and the age they typically begin to absorb and process information, particularly surrounding disturbing events, even if we think we may be shielding them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, just to start, this is a really important topic, especially in this day and age with the amount of access we have to information, right? And so assuming that our kids, our children are not accessing, I think is a wrong assumption. I think we need to understand that they're accessing this information, and how do we kind of developmentally understand what happens to them or what's going on when they do have access to information of things going on around them, right, in their community, in the world at large. And so what essentially we're talking about is developmental awareness. And so we can start by saying, kids, children, babies age 0 to say 3 are really influenced by their parent, their caregiver, the environment that they're existing in, right? And so their level of emotional in-tuneness is high, right? And so if their caregiver or parent is upset, or if the environment around them is calm or chaotic, like they are directly impacted by that, right? And then as kids kind of transition from being babies to becoming toddlers, I think one of the things that we understand is how much information they are paying attention to, right? They are listening, they are watching. And so, kind of expanding on what we were talking about, the nonverbals that babies are picking up, toddlers and 3+ years of age and higher are also picking up on, but they're starting to really hear things, right? And whether they can fully understand it or process it, they're hearing things, and also in combination of the nonverbal information that they're taking in. And so I think really the thing to highlight in this moment is that as soon as that person is in this world, they are taking in information. So From the day they're born. I think it's important for parents and adults and caregivers to understand that our kids are taking in information, and we need to thoughtfully and intentionally try to think about how to support them around kind of the information that they're going to be exposed to for the better, and potentially challenging or complex things that they might see in the world. So
Absolutely. Now, how do we balance being honest with them, with our children, while preserving their sense of safety and security?
yeah, I think you outlined it perfectly, Cynthia, right? There's the balance is between honesty and safety. And one of the things that I like about the idea of balance is it's rarely exactly like this, right? And so we're kind of trying to, be honest and make sure that we're reassuring our children that they are safe, right? And so I think we'll talk more about it in this conversation of specific, ages and kind of developmental approaches around how honest we are, how transparent we're being, right? And how much we're kind of focusing on the safety of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think an important piece to highlight is two things. First is the specific kid, right? So I think about how unique and individual every single kid is. And as a parent, caregiver, an adult in a young person's life, we want to try to uh, cultivate our response based on our understanding of that specific kid. Okay. And then even broader than that, or zoomed out from that, I think about, kind of honoring the family that kid is a member of. Right. And so the piece that as a therapist that I work really hard to kind of understand is the culture of that family. And the way that I've learned to understand the culture of someone's family is through their values. And some of the work we do as therapists is helping kids, families, individuals understand what their values are. That could be a whole separate podcast in terms of that. But I think those are really important components. And I've been thinking about how we're going to navigate this particular topic, which is when information is accessed, and how do we support a young person in digesting that and working through it, depending on who they are, the family that they exist in, and developmental appropriateness.
Mm-hmm. And Corey, you touched upon this a little bit, but this leads me into the next question about walking us through these conversations and how they differ based on age group, say elementary school, middle school, and then teenagers. How can you give us some examples of how to appropriately speak to our children about these topics?
Yeah, I have some notes here because I think that there's, really integral, important pieces of information to try to share with your listeners that we want to highlight, right?
Yeah, go for it.
So what I would say is, like, for preschool age kids, we really want to think about kind of the leaning like more towards like the emotional aspect of it all, right? Of like paying attention to our own emotional experience, right? Related to what's happening in the world at large around us, because that's what they're in tune with, right? And is directly impacted by, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think specifically, if we're, could draw on some wisdoms from play therapy, right? We think about young people processing through play, right? So play is not just play for kids. It's how they understand the world around them, how they process their emotions. And so, we can utilize that. You don't have to be a trained play therapist to utilize play in supporting a young person, age, let's say 0 to 3 or 4, in processing their emotions and understanding the world around them, right? It could be as simple as navigating social relationships, right? And I know in the context of this conversation, we're talking about being exposed or having access to information, right?
Right.
Quick example of that is my 4.5-year-old daughter last night happened to see on the news an airplane dropping fire retardant on a fire that's happening. And she was asking questions about what that was. And as I was preparing for this, our conversation today, I was like, oh, I get to use some of the things that I've been thinking about. And luckily I was, had that as kind of the front of my mind, which we don't always have, right? And we can talk about that further. But I think, thinking of, again, like kind of having some of that developmental understanding can help us in being prepared for these conversations. So moving on to let's say early elementary, age 5 to 8, right? So we think about using very simple, concrete language, right? And concrete language is specific, right? So instead of saying fruit or produce, right, we're going to say, a very specific type of apple, right? And that we ate it for breakfast or we ate it for lunch, right? And so we want to be simple but very specific in the language that we're using, right? And similar to what we were talking about, if we think about kind of this young person growing up, right, we're going to always validate the emotion, the feeling that they're experiencing. We're going to listen. We're going to ask questions, and as the parent or caregiver, we always have to remember to take a deep breath, because what could be happening could also be upsetting to us, and we need to remember that our kids can sense that. They can feel when we are upset or dysregulated. And so anything we can do to help bring ourselves down is worth it, right? For ourselves, but also our kids are going to experience that, right? In that specific conversation. Also just to role model that as an important part of our well-being. So for, that age group, I think play is also a great strategy in terms of talking things through. Books, right? You're starting to read a lot of books to kids at that age. So accessing different resources from the library, depending on what it is that's happening or has happened, right? Utilizing books and stories, right? So thinking about how that, that age range really starts to to absorb information, right? And so that those kids are really into books and stories and play. And then reassuring safety, right? Remembering kind of that balance of being honest, but also reassuring safety. And so a great quote, I think it's always nice to have some things to say, right? And to, adjust them according to your style, right? But a great quote is, sometimes sad things happen in the world. And when they do, adults work together to help and keep children safe. And so some iteration of that, of saying that yes, these, sad or hard or scary things do happen. And there are adults in the world that are working really hard to keep things safe, right? And specifically in your world, it's, me as your parent or caregiver, it's your teachers, it's your community members that are working hard to keep your world safe, right? So really ensuring that. And then, we kind of move on to the middle school years, 9 to 12. And that's where I think we can start to really, engage in a little bit more dialogue, right?
Right.
Where we're, again, asking lots of open-ended questions, right? And so open-ended questions, the quick version of that is not yes or no questions, right? Of tell me what you think about that, or how did that impact you? Or that sounds that sounded scary. Was that scary for you? That's not an open-ended question, but thinking about trying to, cultivate answers from them versus, feeding them kind of yes or no questions. So, and I think, acknowledging kind of the complexity of whatever has happened is worthwhile, right? Is helping them start to, recognize that lots of these, things that happen in the world are complex, right? And their brains are starting to be able to understand some of these complexities. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so, I think that one of the pieces I think about at this age is like connecting it to community, right? And the impact that it has on them individually, but also say like their fellow classmates and their friends and like the community that they're part of, right? Because they're starting to, really engage in that part of things kind of outside of their direct family, working and navigating through their community. So a good, example for script is this is a complicated situation where people disagree about important things. Let's talk about what you're hearing and how you're feeling, right? And then quick, we can kind of move on to like kind of age 13 plus, right? Again, we're like kind of increasing the complexity or like, young people's ability to like understand the complexity of these situations, right?
Right.
And as always, kind of as I've said, right, we want to lead with kind of the emotional part of it, of like not acknowledging the feelings first, right? Understanding kind of the information that they've accessed and how it's impacted them, and giving some space for like the emotional component of what's happening in that moment. So yeah, and I think this is where we kind of start to think about like critical thinking and supporting young people in what we call media literacy, right? And so there's a lot to that. There's the boundaries of what you access and how you access it, right? And then there's also like understanding how to determine if the information is accurate or inaccurate, right? So beginning to teach young people about that. And there's all sorts of different directions we could go with that in terms of how we role model that as the adults in their lives. But again, these are some of like the basic ideas that I think is important for adults to be thinking about, right? And then I think especially at this age, this is a really cool time to think about action opportunities. So volunteering, advocacy, donations, right? We hear some really inspiring stories about young people responding to really difficult things that happen around the world in advocacy of people that have gone through something really difficult. And so those are always, uplifting to see. So,
Absolutely.
and, I think these are times where young people start to express opinions that could be different or difficult to hear. And I think, it's an opportunity to listen, to challenge, but also to like, lead with kind of that listening and kind of more open, open-ended questions versus like immediately challenging them if they say something that you disagree with or dislike. Right? It's like giving them an opportunity to think through and work through some of their ideas or opinions about things, I think is really important. And so some good examples for things that you could say are, what are your thoughts about this situation? How do you think we should respond as a family or as a community, right? And then, I think we kind of talked about this earlier, right? But it's like the developmental information is really helpful to have, right? But you don't want to just stop there, right? You want to apply that information to your specific kid, right? And so we know, right, some kids maybe are more in tune with their emotions, and maybe some kids are more intellectual. And so I always think about how can we respond holistically, but maybe lead with what they are more familiar with or comfortable with in terms of processing information or something that they're navigating in their world. I think that's probably a good kind of overarching coverage of some of the development.
Oh, it was excellent. Really helpful, Corey, especially breaking it down by age group and helping us understand certain words or phrases to use and certain approaches like play versus asking open-ended questions. I think that was incredibly helpful. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to what we should look for now. So now that we've had these conversations, or now that we are aware that our kids have some sense of what's happening that may affect them, what are some of the red flags that parents should watch for that might indicate your child is struggling with something that they've heard or that they've seen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a good question, right? And it goes back to some of that, individualized nature of all of this, right? And so as the adults, as parents, caregivers, right, we're paying close attention to the kids that we're, focused on, right? And so
Yeah.
any change in behavior, but the reality is there's change in behavior because there's a lot of growth and change that is happening for these young people. But I would say anything kind of significant that you're noticing, that's lasting for more than 2 to 3 weeks, right? And if they're dysregulated or not seeming to be coping in kind of what quote unquote normal ways that they do, right? Any shift in that I think is an opportunity to check in with them, to think about, do they need additional support to work through this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the kind of minimum is a check-in, right? Is like kind of thinking about, oh, do I need to kind of sit down with my kid or find a moment to, connect with my kid, whether it's driving or, sitting down kind of when there's a quiet moment to have some conversations there. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I think, some of the things to highlight around behavioral changes that are nuanced is like sleep patterns, right?
Mm-hmm.
How they're, eating, right? How they're like, doing self-care, like, showering, brushing their teeth, like, some of those basic things that if there's a shift in some of that, probably good to kind of just like keep on your radar and think about like, are they stressed? Are they struggling? Are they, going in and they need some opportunity to kind of talk through, things that are happening kind of in the world around them. So,
Yeah.
um, and again, like it's so age dependent, right? And so like thinking about, younger kids, if there's any type of stuff like regression related, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
bedwetting or kind of inconsolable emotionally, right? That outside of kind of the ordinary, right? That you might, have some concerns. So, yeah, and I think any kind of like social withdrawal, school performance, or kind of
Mm-hmm.
attention related concerns. Um, and I think, for kids that are, that go inward, it's of concern. And then kids that are kind of, their behaviors are out of control, right? Or they're constantly expressing worry or anxiety, right? We want to look for those, kind of differences and try to respond, accordingly. So, yeah.
Yeah, like attachment issues, if you've seen a difference in the way that they are when you leave the house for work or something like that, that's something that I've noticed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think attachment frameworks are really important to try to understand too, as parents, caregivers, adults in the lives of young people, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
access to a lot of information related to kind of the psychology of human beings, right? And attachment is one of those that I think is really helpful. And if, to your point, right, if there's a difference in kind of what you know about your kiddo's attachment style or kind of natural way, right,
Mm-hmm.
there's an opportunity to kind of be like, oh, something's going on here. Like, what do we need to do, right? It could be
Yeah.
as simple as conversation and spending time with them, right? It could be more, higher level response, like thinking about, additional support, right? Like working with a therapist or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I always think about like, kind of this idea of like proactive versus reactive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's ideal to kind of proactively think about what your kid needs, but that's, the reality is that we can't always anticipate that. And so sometimes we're in a position of kind of reacting. Something has happened, and we need
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, uh, rally the troops and get some supports in place and, empower, support our kid through kind of this particular moment. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, great when we can be proactive and kind of intentional of, okay, we need to do this for our kiddo, because this is happening or this is coming, right? This transition, this change, like we're, a lot of us right now are moving from, summer programming to back to school, right?
Right. Yeah.
So proactively, what can we do to support our young people in that transition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some of what's happening in this conversation is like when kids access information, they're transitioning from one reality to a new reality of understanding maybe some more complex things that happen in the world. And so supporting them, empowering them through that transition is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Corey. So, on the note of being proactive, my next question for you is, what's your advice for parents who realize their child has been already exposed to something or some disturbing information or news story before they've had a chance to be proactive and talk to them about it?
Yeah. It's in some ways simple in theory, but maybe more challenging in action, which is the communication piece, right? Is to talk to them about it, to use some of the frameworks that we've talked about today, right? Of thinking about, okay, like they have been exposed to this piece of information that I didn't either want them to be exposed to, I'm not sure that they're ready for, or I know that they're not ready for. What we know is we have honest conversations with our kids builds trust, right? And when kids feel trust, they also build resiliency in line with that, right? And so having those open, honest conversations with them, reassuring safety, right? And making sure that we're thinking about it kind of in the context of like what's appropriate based on their their developmental age, but also their individual uniqueness, right? And so, does that answer your question? I think that's
Yeah, I think so. And I think you did cover that a lot in the steps to, to address things, whether we know that they have heard about it without appropriately discussing it with them proactively. I think that we are now armed with some of the approaches and the steps to take to talk to our kids. So thanks for that.
If I can, I would say, like, I think it's for all, people that are supporting young people, like, I think we have to remember that there's no way to perfectly protect them, right, from all of the things in the world. And like, we want to protect them. And the way that we really do it is by giving them the tools to be able to navigate through the imperfect world that we live in, right? And remembering that really there is safety, right? And that they, whether it's kind of internal or kind of within your family system or the larger community, right? That part of what we're trying to do is to give them the tools and the skills to be able to navigate through, the complex world that we exist in.
100%. And Corey, I think it comes, like you said, it's not just about parents, it's anyone who is out there to support kids, teachers, therapists, advocates, attorneys, whatever capacity you play in a child's role. But I think that us as humans, we also carry that overwhelmed feeling at times when processing these horrific stories that are in the news right now. I'm just wondering if there's any advice you have for us, for parents, for people, for adults, on how to manage our own emotional reaction to these stories while caring and keeping our children's best interests at heart.
Yeah. One of the, I think, easiest examples that I think a lot of people can relate to, and this is used a lot in the mental health world specific to parenting, is, when you're on an airplane and they are going through the safety protocols, right? And they say, they literally come to all the parents and say, like, put the oxygen mask on first and then put on your kid's oxygen mask, right? And so we always think about this idea of like starting with self-care and, the parent, the the caregiver's emotional well-being first, right? And so it's not, it role models to the young person, but it also helps that individual parent, caregiver to be able to show up as best they can, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that we all have a lot going on, right? And so we don't always show up perfectly for our kids, and so that's okay, right? We don't have to be perfect in all of this. It's about remembering as best we can to take good care of ourselves, so ideally we can show up well. And then when we don't, that we come back to our kids and we say, hey, like, I want to revisit that, right? I think there's some things I want to say differently. I have some other questions for you, right? It's an opportunity to kind of show that that we don't have to be perfect in all of this, but the foundation is our own emotional regulation, right? Our own ability to navigate as grounded as possible, to support our kids in working through these hard moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Corey, that is so important. This conversation has been so helpful for me. I know that I've been struggling a little bit at times. I haven't been reading the newspaper as much lately because I feel like it has been affecting me. So thank you for sharing your advice and, all the things that you've been working with your patients and your families with my audience. I appreciate it very much. And I'm curious, how can people get in contact with you or learn more about Rocky Mountain Counseling?
Yeah, thanks again, Cynthia. We were talking about this earlier. Like, this is an important topic, and I think
Very
the
much, yeah.
point that you just made is a really important one, which is kind of an additional point is, our own boundaries and, managing of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
For ourselves and, to role model to young people. So, yeah, so Rocky Mountain Counseling Collective, we're in the Denver metro area. We have a website, which is rmcchealth.com. You're welcome to reach out. Obviously, if you're in Colorado, we could be of direct support.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our therapists actually have licenses outside of Colorado, but happy to connect, right? Feel free to send a message, through our website. I have many conversations with folks that don't become our clients, and we talk about resources and pointing them in the right direction. And so we're happy to do that, right? It's, I think, an important part of advocating for, people just getting connected to the right resources, right resource versus just any. And if we're a resource, great. And if not, we'd be happy to brainstorm and point folks in the right direction. Okay. Thank you.
All right, Corey, it was great to meet you and talk to you. Thanks again for your time.
Okay. Bye, Cynthia. Thank you. I appreciate it.